Today we are going to review how to complete phase 2 or the factor calculation portion of annual processing. That's located in data operations, annual, and here's 2 factor calculations. So to begin, you need to set up a few of the criteria or rules you want to follow for creating factors. Once you have these set, the settings will remain for subsequent years, but if this is the first time you've run factor calculations in Jackalope, you'll need to set these things. Initially, you will be brought to either the most recent year or the most current year that you had looked at last. I was looking at the year 2016 last time I was in this database, so that's what's being brought to my screen. You'll also always be returned to the factor type and the group that you had been looking at most recently. So to begin, you want to start by clicking the Options button, and you will want to make sure that your factor methodology is set to annual and not monthly if you create factors once a year during the annual process. The monthly setting is for those who do the monthly factor workshop and create factors each month at the end of each month. So then the factor generation options are these. Years to go back while using factors, that's how far will Jackalope go back to look for a factor to apply to data that's being processed. And typically we see this set at 5. Jackalope will look back for 5 years to find a factor and use the first one that it finds, the most recent one that it finds. If you were to set this to 1, Jackalope would only go back to 1 year prior looking for a factor, and if a factor was not calculated last year, it won't go back any further to look for one. So we're going to, in this case, give Jackalope 5 years to go back and find a factor. The minimum number of years required, that is the minimum number of AADTs that must be present for a site to be used in calculating this factor. Typically, we see this set to 1, that you want to use data from just this last year in calculating the factor. If you were to set this to 3, for example, you're saying you want 3 full years worth or 3 years of AADTs for a site to be included in factor calculations. But in this case, we're going to say 1. We just want data that's within a year old to be used for factor calculations. And then years to go back while creating factors is the number of years Jackalope should go back in order to create the factor. Meaning if data was not collected last year, but it was collected 2 years ago, would we want to create a factor based off of 2 years ago worth of data that was from 2 years ago? And no, typically we see that we want factors calculated from data that was calculated or collected in the last year. So we'll use this typical settings 5, 1, and 1 and hit save. Wait for the screen to finish refreshing here and saving our settings. Then the next step will be, and let's move to 2017 because I'm recording this video in 2018 and we're going to be looking at 2017 here. First of all, just to make yourself familiar with the grid, you will see the last 5 or 6 years worth of factors displaying here. Although I'm working on 2017 factors, I'm going to be shown the most recent factors available. And you can see in this case, 2016 factors were not calculated, but there were some factors for 2015 and prior. Factors in blue are plugged factors. Factors plugged by the user, and factors that appear in white, just a regular screen color, will be factors that were calculated by Jackalope off of data. So after entering your options, the next process that you'll do is click Manage Sites. If we were to create seasonal factors for Group 1, we first want to start by building the list of sites that are in this Group 1. So we'll click Manage Sites. And your options can be either to add all continuous sites with data in the current year, and that's what we typically see. You can add all short-term and continuous sites with data in the current year, or add sites that were in this group last year. Now that will obviously be a problem if you didn't create factors last year. There wouldn't have been groups last year, so this may not be an option for you, but that's a choice you could do as well. You can do that for all groups, or you can just work one group at a time in case you'd like to do different actions for different groups. So we'll do that for all groups here. If you had gone through this manage sites setting before and didn't like the results, you could checkbox this remove current sites and then do these steps as I've indicated. You can set this as your default action, that each year these are the radio buttons you want to pre-populate when you come into this screen. So you can either view what your default is, which is nothing yet, I haven't saved anything. And then if I want to set this as my default, I typically always want to add continuous sites, and I typically want to do all my groups at the same time. I could click Set Default Action. When that's done, I'll say OK, and I'll close my window. At that time, when your screen is refreshing, and you'll want to give it a few moments, this site data grid will start filling up with sites. Once it is completely filled up with sites, and you'll see that they won't have any factors at the beginning, once all of the sites have been filled in here, you can then start generating your factors for 2017, in this case seasonal group 1. You'd click Generate Factors, and you can have a number of choices. Generate all factor groups, so all of the seasonal groups, let's say group 1s, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, for example, or you can just choose to create factors for just group 1, and then maybe you'll review those, go to group 2 and generate group 2. You can also copy factors from group 1 into, let's say you had created factors for group 5 already and you're going to use those for 1. You could say copy factors from group 5 into group 1 with the option to only copy from missing factors or copy the whole group if you'd like to. Another option would be to copy factors from, let's say, 2012 group 1 into 2017 group 1, if you like 2012's factors, or if you're a state that tends to copy factors that are the same from one year to the next, you could certainly say I'd like to copy 2015, these factors we had back here, into 2017. So you'll set these, if you'd like to, you can say copy here if those are your choices. But to begin, typically we see people will select that generate factors for all factor groups, and they'll click Generate. Once you do that, your screen will begin refreshing and this pop-up window will close. As factors are being calculated, your screen will occasionally refresh itself, and when all of the factors, all of the site factors have been calculated, and then the group factor is calculated, the screen will completely refresh, showing you your 2017 factors for seasonal group 1. And as you switch between groups, you'll see the screen refresh to other group factors. If you happen to have a finicky connection to Jackalope that sometimes disconnects itself, it's possible that you might need to toggle between screens in order to sort of force a refresh, because perhaps your session was slightly disconnected and you're not going to get refreshed very well. Currently, the refresh button at the bottom of the site data grid is functional. However, the refresh button here is being worked on because if you click this right now, you'll get a grid that fills with a number of nonsense factors. It's just a view display problem. So at this time, please do not use this reload grid button. You may only use the bottom one here in site data. And if you'd like to refresh your screen, just toggle between factor groups and let the screen refresh itself and then go back to the one that you were looking at. And that's typically how to create factors. If you end up generating all of your factors and you decide that one isn't quite what you liked, you may double click within a cell and it will indicate factor group 2 for June had an old value of 0.923 in that particular cell we were looking at. You can type in a new value, or you can leave it empty in order to remove the factor entirely. And if you'd like, you can indicate a reason why. You can either hit save or then cancel if you change your mind. And then when hovering over the plugged factor, you'll see a reason if in fact that reason was given. And here we have NA because these were all just plugged factors from a data load. And that's how to create factors.